They say the most dangerous men in New York don't scream threats. They whisper them. The truly powerful ones never raise their voices at all. They simply look at you with eyes cold as winter steel, and you understand that your life has just changed forever. I learned this truth on a Wednesday night in Tribeca, when the rain fell like knives and the city smelled of wet concrete and broken dreams. I learned it the moment I met Marco Vittorio, when a spilled glass of wine and a few words spoken in my grandmother's ancient dialect set in motion a chain of events that would transform me from prey into predator, from servant into queen. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to the beginning, to the night when Isabella Romano, 24 years old and drowning in debt, walked into the kingdom of monsters wearing a cheap black uniform and carrying a tray of sparkling water. To the night when everything changed. The rain in Tribeca wasn't just rain. It was a freezing gray assault that seemed determined to drown the entire island of Manhattan. Inside Rosso Antico, one of the most exclusive Italian restaurants on Greenwich Street, the atmosphere hummed with a different kind of tension altogether. Golden light spilled from crystal chandeliers. The air hung thick with the scent of aged Parmesan, truffle oil, and the particular brand of anxiety that comes from serving people who could destroy your life with a single phone call. I adjusted my apron for the 21st time that shift, my hands trembling just slightly. 3 weeks, 21 consecutive double shifts. My feet screamed inside cheap non-slip shoes, and my lower back throbbed with the kind of pain that comes from carrying heavy trays for 14 hours straight. But I couldn't stop, couldn't slow down. Not with the notices piling up in my studio apartment in the Bronx, not with the text messages from my father that always started with baby girl and ended with another plea for money I didn't have. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I ignored it. I knew who it was. I knew what he wanted. The same thing he'd wanted for the last 3 years, ever since the gambling addiction had taken hold of him like a disease, transforming the man who once taught me to make perfect pasta dough into someone I barely recognized. Armand, the floor manager, materialized at my elbow like a particularly nasty ghost. He was a small man with a small man's desperate need to wield whatever tiny power he possessed. His breath smelled like espresso and cruelty. "Table 9, he hissed, his thin lips barely moving. "Do not screw this up, Sophia. If they ask for water, you pour it before the glass is half empty. If they drop a fork, you catch it before it hits the floor. Are we clear?" "My name is Isabella," I said quietly, but he was already gone, disappearing into the kitchen with the self-importance of someone who believed himself indispensable. I looked at table 9. My stomach tightened. It was the corner booth, the one with the best view of the entrance but shielded from the street windows. Strategic, defensive. The kind of table chosen by someone who always needed to see who was coming and who was leaving. 3 men sat there, though calling them simply men felt inadequate. They were something else entirely. 2 of them were massive, their expensive suits tailored to accommodate shoulders built for violence. Brioni silk blends, if I had to guess. The kind of fabric that cost more than I made in 6 months. The suits couldn't quite hide what they were meant to conceal. The slight bulge under the left arm. The way they sat with their backs to the wall. The way their eyes never stopped moving, cataloging threats, measuring distances, calculating odds. But it was the man in the middle who stole my breath. He was younger than his companions, perhaps in his early 30s. Dark hair swept back from a face that could have belonged to a Roman emperor or a Renaissance prince. Strong jaw, high cheekbones, lips that looked like they'd forgotten how to smile. But it was the eyes that trapped you. Dark as midnight, cold as obsidian. Shattered into 1,000 fragments by something that might have been pain, or might have been rage, or might have been both. He wasn't eating, wasn't even looking at the menu. He was watching the room with the focused intensity of a predator, taking in every detail, assessing every person, calculating angles and exits and possibilities. Marco Vittorio. Even I, who kept my head down and my mouth shut and my tips carefully counted, knew the name. The NYPD Organized Crime Bureau had a file on him the size of a phone book, or so the rumor said, but nothing ever stuck. No charges, no convictions. He was a ghost who somehow owned half the waterfront, a phantom who made million-dollar problems disappear with a phone call. He was the capo of the Vittorio crime family, the most dangerous man in New York, and sitting beside him, wrapped in a black fur coat despite the warmth of the restaurant, was an elderly woman who looked like she could start a war with a single word. She was perhaps 80 years old, her silver hair pulled back into a severe bun that emphasized the sharp planes of her face. Everything about her spoke of old-world authority, the kind that came not from money or position but from surviving things that would have broken lesser people. Her eyes, when they finally lifted to meet mine, held a lifetime of judgment and not a trace of mercy. This was Carmela Vittorio, Marco's mother, the matriarch of a dynasty built on blood and concrete and carefully maintained silences. I approached the table on legs that threatened to buckle. I could feel Armand, watching from across the room, could sense his nervous energy like static electricity before a storm. Whatever happened next, I couldn't afford to fail. Not tonight. Not ever. Buonasera, I managed, my voice steadier than I felt. Welcome to Rosso Antico. The two bodyguards didn't look at me. They were too busy watching everything else. But Carmela's gaze fixed on me with the intensity of a scientist examining an interesting specimen. She leaned forward slightly, and I caught the scent of expensive perfume mixed with something older, something that smelled like incense and distant memories. Water, she said, her English heavily accented, each word weighted with generations of Sicilian pride and pain. And tell the chef if he puts cream in the carbonara like the last place, I will burn this building down myself. Marco Vittorio sighed. It was a sound of pure exhaustion, the kind that comes from fighting the same battle day after day and never quite winning. Mama, he said, and even that single word carried volumes. Please be nice. I am nice. Carmela slammed her hand on the table, making the silverware jump. I am hungry, Marco, but this country they cook like barbarians. They give me noodles and ketchup and call it marinara. Do they think I am stupid? Do they think I don't remember how food is supposed to taste? I saw it then, in the fractional softening of her face before she caught herself and rebuilt the walls. I saw what Armand couldn't see, what the kitchen staff wouldn't understand, what even Marco seemed to have stopped recognizing. Carmela Vittorio wasn't angry. She was homesick. I poured the sparkling water with hands that had finally stopped shaking. My mind raced through possibilities, through the recipes my grandmother had taught me in the small kitchen of her Queens apartment before the cancer took her, through the words she'd whispered in a dialect so specific, so particular to one small region of Sicily, that most Italians couldn't understand it. We make our carbonara the Roman way, signora, I said softly, careful to keep my voice respectful. Guanciale, pecorino romano, eggs, and black pepper. No cream, never cream. Carmela narrowed her eyes and leaned forward, close enough that I could see the fine network of wrinkles that mapped her face like roads on an ancient map. She inhaled slowly, deliberately. You smell like garlic and rain, she said, her voice dropping to something almost intimate. You are Italian? My father is from Palermo, signora. She scoffed, actually scoffed. Palermo, city of thieves and liars. Marco rubbed his temples. Mama, leave the girl alone. Just order something. I want nothing. The fury returned in a flash, burning through whatever softness I'd glimpsed. My stomach hurts. This food, this country, everything hurts. I want to go home, Marco. Take me back to the estate. I don't want to be here anymore. The tension at the table spiked like a fever breaking. The bodyguards shifted in their seats. Marco's jaw tightened until I could see the muscle jumping beneath the skin. He was the most powerful man in the city, capable of making problems disappear with a gesture. But he was completely helpless against this 80-year-old woman's misery. I shouldn't have done what I did next. Armand would fire me if he knew. The kitchen staff would think I was overstepping. Every instinct trained into me by 3 years of keeping my head down and my mouth shut told me to walk away, bring them bread, let someone else deal with the impossible woman in the black fur coat. But I saw the pain in Carmela's eyes. I saw the loneliness that came from being surrounded by people who feared you or needed you but couldn't truly understand you. And I thought of my own grandmother, of the way she used to cry quietly on Sunday afternoons, staring at photographs of a Sicily she would never see again. I leaned in slightly, close enough that my words would reach only Carmela. And I switched languages. Not to Italian, which any competent server in an Italian restaurant might speak, but to the dialect, the specific, ancient, dying dialect spoken only in a handful of villages in the mountains above Palermo. The language of grandmothers and old women and secrets passed down through generations. Signora, ascoltami, I began, and I watched her eyes go wide. Listen to me, signora. Il cuoco qui è di Milano, è arrogante, pensa di sapere tutto. Ma se mi permetti, andrò in cucina io stessa e ti preparerò pastina in brodo, come la facciamo per i bambini malati d'inverno. Brodo caldo, stelline piccole, un po' di scorza di parmigiano per insaporire. Ti riscalderà le ossa. The table went silent. It was the kind of silence that precedes earthquakes, the kind that makes your ears ring and your heart stutter. The bodyguards froze mid-movement, their hands automatically drifting toward their weapons before stopping, confused by a threat they couldn't identify. Marco Vittorio stopped rubbing his temples. Slowly, with the deliberate care of a predator that has just caught an unexpected scent, he turned his head to look at me. His eyes locked onto mine. I had never felt anything like it in my life. It wasn't just that he was looking at me. People looked at me all the time, usually right through me as if I were no more substantial than the steam rising from their pasta. This was different. This was being seen, being examined, being dissected by an intelligence that missed nothing and forgot even less. His eyes were exactly as everyone said, shattered obsidian, beautiful and terrible and so cold that I felt my knees threaten to buckle. But Carmela's transformation was even more dramatic. The hardness in her face crumbled like old plaster. Her mouth opened in shock. Her eyes, which had been dry and angry, suddenly brimmed with tears. She reached out and grabbed my hand with a grip strong enough to leave marks, strong enough to stop blood flow, strong enough to anchor herself to something she'd thought lost forever. Tu conosci la lingua, she whispered, and the words trembled. You know the language. Tu conosci la pastina. Mia nonna me l'ha insegnata prima di morire, I said, and my own voice caught. My grandmother taught me before she died. Diceva sempre, guarisce il cuore. She always said it heals the heart. Carmela's tears spilled over, in front of her son, in front of the bodyguards, in front of the entire restaurant. She, who I would later learn had shot 2 men to death without flinching, who had built an empire alongside her husband through sheer force of will, who had buried children and enemies and never once shown weakness, she cried. Marco! The word came out strangled. Marco, l'hai sentita? Parla la lingua del villaggio. Did you hear her? She speaks the language of the village. Marco Vittorio was still staring at me. His expression had shifted into something I couldn't read. Something that might have been calculation, or might have been recognition, or might have been both. When he finally spoke, his voice was a low baritone that seemed to resonate in my chest. What is your name? Isabella, sir. Isabella Romano. He leaned back slowly, a small danger-bar smile playing at the corners of his mouth. It was the smile of a chess player who has just seen an unexpected move that might change the entire game. Isabella Romano, he repeated, tasting each syllable. You just did something no one in my organization has been able to do in 10 years. You made my mother smile. I felt my face flush. I'll go tell the chef about the broth. I pulled my hand free from Carmela's grip, stammered something else I don't remember, and fled toward the kitchen. My heart hammered against my ribs so hard I thought it might crack through bone. Behind me, I heard Carmela speaking rapidly in Italian to Marco, her voice animated in a way that suggested excitement, or conspiracy, or both. I pushed through the swinging kitchen doors and leaned against the wall, trying to catch my breath. Pierre, the head chef, glared at me from his station. What do you want? He demanded. Table 9, the old woman. She needs pastina in brodo, exactly the way her mother made it. Can you do that? Pierre's face darkened. I am a Michelin-trained chef. I do not make baby food. Then I'll make it, I said, surprising myself. Show me where the pastina is. What I didn't see, what I couldn't possibly have known as I argued with Pierre over tiny star-shaped pasta and proper broth temperature, was that back at table 9, Marco Vittorio had signaled to one of his bodyguards. The man leaned in close and Marco spoke quietly, never taking his eyes off the kitchen door where I'd disappeared. Enzo, find out everything about her, where she lives, who she owes, what she fears. By morning, I want to know her better than she knows herself. The trap had been set, and Isabella Romano, 24 years old and desperately trying to save enough money to keep the lights on in a studio apartment she couldn't really afford, had walked right into it. The rest of the shift passed in a blur. I made the pastina myself, ignoring Pierre's protests, focusing all my attention on getting it exactly right. The broth had to be clear and golden. The pasta had to be cooked until tender, but not mushy. The Parmesan rind had to steep long enough to infuse the liquid with that subtle, nutty flavor that made the difference between food and comfort. When I brought it to table 9, Carmela took one spoonful, closed her eyes, and I watched decades of tension drain from her face. She ate the entire bowl, scraped it clean, looked at me with something that might have been gratitude or might have been hunger of an entirely different kind. Marco, she said, still speaking Italian, I want her. Want her for what, Mama? As my companion, to stay with me. She understands. Marco's dark eyes found mine again. This time I was prepared for the impact, or thought I was. I was wrong. You can never really prepare for being seen by someone like Marco Vittorio. "We'll see, Mama," he said carefully. "We'll see." The shift ended at 2 in the morning. The rain had turned to sleet, the kind that bites exposed skin and makes your bones ache. I clocked out, collected my tips, $150 that would keep the electricity on for another week, but wouldn't touch the debt. The real debt, the $40,000 nightmare that grew by $500 every day, thanks to interest that should have been illegal, but wasn't. Not when you borrowed from the kind of people my father had borrowed from. I pulled my thin coat tight and started walking toward the Canal Street subway station. The streets were empty except for the occasional taxi throwing up sheets of dirty water. My phone buzzed. I pulled it out, saw my father's name, and my stomach twisted. The text message was short. "Baby girl, I found a buyer. Don't worry, Papa will fix everything." A buyer? A buyer for what? The apartment was already in my name. He had nothing left to sell except the same promises he'd been selling for years. The same guarantees that this time would be different. This time he'd win it all back. This time the luck would change. I was so focused on the phone that I didn't hear the car until it was right beside me. A black Cadillac Escalade rolled alongside me like a shark cutting through dark water. The windows were tinted so dark they looked like mirrors reflecting the rain and the streetlights and my own pale, frightened face. My heart stopped. Actually stopped for a beat or two before lurching back into frantic rhythm. The Lombardis. It had to be. They'd finally come to collect. They'd gotten tired of waiting for me to scrape together payments. They were going to drag me into that car, and I would end up in the East River wearing concrete shoes like something out of a bad movie, except this was real. This was happening. This was my life. I walked faster. The car matched my pace. I started to run. The car accelerated smoothly, effortlessly, staying right beside me like a predator toying with prey. The rear window rolled down. "Get in, Isabella." Not the Lombardis, something potentially worse. Marco Vittorio sat in the back seat, still wearing his suit, though the collar was unbuttoned now, and his tie hung loose. He looked tired. He looked human. He also looked like someone who would not ask twice. "I can't," I stammered, backing away. "My father is waiting up for me." "Your father is currently at the Lucky Ace Social Club in Queens, losing the money you gave him for rent." Marco's voice was calm, conversational, as if he were commenting on the weather rather than casually demonstrating that he knew every detail of my life. He held up a manila folder. "And you owe the Lombardis $40,000. Interest is compounding daily." The blood drained from my face. I felt cold all over, despite my racing heart. "How do you know that?" "I told you, I know everything." He gestured to the seat beside him. "Now get in. It's freezing and I hate the cold." I should have run, should have screamed, should have done anything except what I did. But my feet moved of their own accord, carrying me to the car door. My hand reached out. The door opened. The interior was warm and smelled of expensive leather and bourbon and something else. Something metallic that my hindbrain recognized as danger even if my conscious mind couldn't name it. Gun oil. The car smelled like gun oil. I climbed in. The door closed behind me with the solid thunk of German engineering. The car pulled away from the curb, and I watched the Canal Street subway entrance disappear behind us. We weren't heading toward the Bronx. We were heading toward the Brooklyn Bridge, toward Long Island, toward somewhere I'd never been and might never leave. Marco poured amber liquid from a crystal decanter built into the console. Bourbon, expensive enough that the bottle probably cost more than my rent. He handed me a glass. "Drink," he said. "It helps with the nerves." My hand shook as I took it. I sipped. The bourbon burned going down, but it was a clean burn, warming me from the inside. Marco took a sip from his own glass and turned to face me properly. In the close confines of the car, his presence was overwhelming. He was big, not just tall, but solid, built like someone who had grown up fighting and never stopped. There was violence in him that simmered just below the surface, controlled, but never truly dormant. "My mother, Carmela, has refused to eat properly for 6 months," he began, his voice businesslike. "She doesn't trust the staff. She doesn't trust the nurses. She thinks everyone is trying to poison her. But she trusted you." "It was just soup," I whispered. "It wasn't the soup." He set his glass down carefully. "It was the voice. It was the respect. She needs a companion, someone who speaks the language, someone who understands the old ways. I am offering you a job." "I already have a job." "You have servitude." The word came out like a slap. "You wipe tables for ungrateful tourists and collect tips that barely cover your subway fare. I'm offering you a position at the Vittorio estate in Long Island. You'll be my mother's personal companion. You'll cook for her, read to her, ensure she's happy, make sure she eats, keep her company. And in return, he reached into his jacket. For one horrible moment, I thought he was reaching for a gun. Instead, he pulled out a check, placed it on my lap. The amount made my vision swim. $40,000, made out to Lombardi Family Trust. I bought your debt an hour ago, Marco said casually, as if he were discussing the purchase of a used car rather than my entire life. You don't owe them anything anymore. You owe me. I stared at the check. Horror and relief warred in my chest, creating something that felt like nausea or panic or both. He had just erased my debt, just like that. With a stroke of a pen and a phone call, he had removed the weight that had been crushing me for 3 years. But he hadn't freed me. He'd just changed my chains. This is the mafia, I said, my voice barely audible over the hum of the engine. If I come with you, I can never leave, can I? Marco looked at me, and for just a moment, the mask slipped. His eyes softened, just a fraction, just enough for me to see something that might have been regret, or might have been sympathy, or might have been both. Isabella, he said quietly, out here in the world, you are prey. The banks, the landlords, the sharks, they're eating you alive piece by piece, and they won't stop until there's nothing left. In my house, you are protected. You are under my banner. No one touches what is mine. He leaned in closer. His hand came up and brushed a strand of wet hair away from my cheek. The touch was gentle, almost tender, but it carried the weight of ownership, of possession. And make no mistake, Isabella, from the moment you spoke Italian to my mother, you became mine. The car stopped at a red light. Rain drummed on the roof. I looked at the check in my lap, looked at Marco's dark, compelling eyes, looked at the driver in the front seat, separated from us by a partition that probably didn't muffle sound as much as everyone pretended it did. I thought of my father, gambling away money he didn't have at a social club in Queens. I thought of my studio apartment with its broken radiator and persistent smell of mildew. I thought of 3 more years of double shifts and aching feet and Armand's coffee breath, and never quite enough to cover the bills. I thought of the alternative Marco was offering. A golden cage, yes, but a cage with warmth and food and no debt collectors pounding on the door at 3 in the morning. What about my father? I asked. He'll be looked after, but he stays in Queens. You come to the estate alone. Okay, I whispered. The word hung in the air between us for a long moment. Marco nodded to the driver. Home, Enzo. The car accelerated onto the Brooklyn Bridge. Through the window, I watched Manhattan recede behind us, its lights blurred by rain and speed. I was leaving my old life behind. I didn't realize yet that I wasn't just walking into a job. I was walking into a war. Because being Marco Vittorio's favorite, being the person who could make his mother smile, put a target on my back. And Adriana Lombardi, the beautiful blonde daughter of Marco's greatest enemy, his arranged fiancée in a marriage meant to end decades of bloodshed, was already preparing to aim. But that night, in the back of the Escalade, heading toward an estate I'd never seen, I didn't know any of that yet. I just knew that Isabella Romano, Waitress, had just made a deal with the devil. And the devil had very dark eyes and a smile that promised protection and possession in equal measure. The estate emerged from the darkness like something out of a fairy tale, if fairy tales involved armed guards and iron gates and walls high enough to keep out armies. We drove through the entrance, past men with assault rifles who saluted the car with the casual efficiency of soldiers at a checkpoint. The main house loomed ahead, all Italian Renaissance architecture and carefully cultivated roses and fountains that probably cost more than every apartment building in the Bronx combined. This wasn't a house, this was a fortress disguised as a palace. This was where kings lived. Or monsters, or both. The car stopped. Enzo opened my door. Marco climbed out on his side and came around to meet me. Up close, with the estate behind him and guards flanking us, he looked every inch the prince of a criminal empire. Dangerous, beautiful, completely in control. Welcome home, Isabella, he said. And I stepped through the gates into my new life, not knowing that home was just another word for prison, and prison was just another word for safety, and safety was just another word for the place where you finally stop running and start becoming something else entirely. Something stronger, something darker, something that would eventually learn to bite back. But that transformation was still ahead of me. That night, I was just a frightened girl in a cheap coat, following a dangerous man into a beautiful cage. The real story was about to begin. They say you can get used to anything if you live with it long enough. Violence, luxury, fear. Even beauty can become ordinary if you wake up to it every morning. But some things never stop feeling dangerous, no matter how familiar they become. Living in Marco Vittorio's house was like that. Like holding your breath underwater, knowing you'll have to surface eventually, but not sure if there will be air waiting when you do. The first 3 weeks passed in a strange dream. I woke each morning in a suite larger than my entire apartment had been, showered in marble bathrooms with water pressure that actually worked, and ate breakfast prepared by a chef who had trained in kitchens I couldn't pronounce. Carmela welcomed me like the daughter she'd lost, teaching me recipes that had been passed down through 6 generations, telling me stories about Sicily that made her eyes shine with tears she refused to shed. But Marco was a ghost in his own house. I heard him. Late at night, when the rest of the estate slept, I would lie awake and listen to piano music drifting through the halls, haunting melodies that spoke of loss and longing and wounds that never quite healed. Sometimes I would creep to the music room door and watch him through the crack, his strong hands moving across the keys with surprising gentleness, his eyes closed against memories I couldn't see. But he never spoke to me, never ate meals with us, never appeared during the day. It was as if that moment in the kitchen, when he'd brushed flour from my cheek and looked at me like I was something more than hired help, had never happened at all. Rosa, the housekeeper, explained it to me one afternoon while we were folding linens. She was a warm woman in her 50s with kind eyes and careful hands. "He's been like this since Sophia died," she said quietly, glancing toward the door to make sure we were alone. "5 years now. He doesn't sleep, barely eats, just works and works and works, like he's trying to punish himself for still being alive." "Who was Sophia?" I asked, though I already knew the answer would hurt. "His wife. Beautiful girl. Sweet as a summer fruit. She thought she could save him, you know. Thought love could make him leave this life." Rosa's hand stilled on the sheet she was folding. "Then the car exploded. Meant for him, they say. But she was the one who died." That night, Sunday night, 3 weeks after I'd arrived at the estate, I couldn't sleep. The conversation with Rosa had planted something dark in my chest, something that felt like grief for a woman I'd never known. I needed water. Needed air. Needed something to quiet the questions spinning through my mind. I slipped out of my room wearing the silk robe I'd found in the closet, one of dozens of expensive things that had appeared as if by magic, all in my size, all chosen by someone who paid very close attention to details. The hallway was dark except for small lights along the baseboards. The house settled and creaked around me, old bones adjusting to the weight of secrets. I was passing the library when I heard voices. Low. Urgent. The door was slightly open, spilling a slice of golden light across the marble floor. I should have kept walking, should have minded my own business. But I heard my name, and once you hear your own name spoken in secret, it's impossible not to listen. I pressed myself against the wall and held my breath. "The girl is a problem, Marco." That was Enzo, Marco's head of security, the man who had driven me here that first night. "Adriana is furious. The Lombardi alliance hangs by a thread." "Let Adriana be furious." Marco's voice was tired, so tired. "I don't trust the Lombardis anyway. They've been moving product through my ports without paying the tax. The alliance was failing long before Isabella arrived. But keeping her here, it complicates things. If the Lombardis find out who her father is, they will use it. They'll use her." My heart stopped. "Found out who my father is? What did Enzo mean?" "Her father is a gambling addict," Enzo continued. "A nobody. But he's also something else, isn't he, boss?" Silence. Long enough that I thought maybe they'd finished. Maybe I should run before they discovered me. Then Marco spoke, and his voice had dropped to something cold and dangerous. "Vincent Romano was the driver for the heist that killed my uncle. The 1998 job. You know this, Enzo. Everyone knows this." The floor seemed to tilt beneath my feet. My father. My father had been involved in a heist that killed Marco's uncle. My father, who I'd always known as weak, as broken by gambling, had been part of something that cost the Vittorio family blood. "That's why I brought her here," Marco continued. "Vincent has the ledger, the missing book from the 98 heist. It contains the names of every corrupt judge and cop on our payroll. He stole it to ensure we wouldn't kill him. He's been hiding it for 26 years, using it as insurance." "So the girl," Enzo's voice was careful, "she's not really here for Carmela." My mother was the entry point, the excuse, the cover story that everyone would believe. I heard the clink of glass, the sound of liquid being poured. Vincent Romano has to come out of hiding eventually. He has to bring me that book. And the only thing that will make him surface is his daughter. I have her now. He'll come for her. And when he does, I'll get the ledger and end this. So Isabella is bait. Yes. The word hung in the air like poison, like a curse, like the truth I'd been too stupid to see. I backed away from the door slowly, my hand pressed against my mouth to keep the sob from escaping. Everything had been a lie. The joy, the kindness, the way Marco had defended me against Adriana at the lunch, all of it calculated, all of it strategy. I wasn't a person to him. I was a chess piece, a tool, a means to an end. I made it back to my room before the tears came. They burned like acid, like shame, like the particular kind of pain that comes from believing yourself valued when you were only ever being used. I grabbed my phone with shaking hands and dialed my father's number. It went straight to voicemail. Papa, I whispered into the phone, my voice breaking. Papa, listen to me. Don't come to the estate. Don't try to contact me. It's a trap. Marco Vittorio knows about the heist. He knows about the book. He's using me to get to you. Run, Papa. Please just run. I hung up and stared at the phone in my hand. Then I started throwing clothes into a bag. I had to leave. Had to get out before Marco realized I knew the truth. Had to warn my father before it was too late. I opened my bedroom door and found two massive bodyguards blocking the exit. Going somewhere, Miss Romano? The one on the left asked. His voice was polite. His eyes were not. I need to go to the pharmacy, I lied. My voice came out high and thin. I have a headache. Mr. Vittorio gave strict orders. No one leaves the estate tonight, especially not you. Let me through. I tried to push past them. They didn't move. They were like walls, like mountains, immovable and completely indifferent to my panic. Isabella. The voice came from behind the guards. They parted like a curtain, and Marco stepped through. He was still dressed, still awake despite the late hour. He looked at my bag, then at my tear-stained face, and something flickered across his features. Not quite guilt, not quite regret, something closer to resignation. You were listening, and he said, it wasn't a question. You used me. The words exploded out of me, 3 weeks of gratitude and confusion, and something dangerously close to affection curdling into rage. You lied to me. You made me believe you cared, that I was safe here, that this was real. You're a monster, Marco. He stepped into my room and closed the door behind him, leaving the guards outside. In the confined space, he seemed even larger, even more dangerous. But when he reached for me, his touch was gentle. He took my arms, not roughly, but firmly enough that I couldn't pull away. Listen to me, he said, his voice low and urgent. Yes, I brought you here to get the ledger. That was the plan. I won't lie to you about that. Then let me go. I struggled against his grip. Let me leave. I can't. Why not? Because Enzo just got a call 20 minutes ago. Your father didn't run, Isabella. He tried to sell the ledger to the Lombardis an hour ago to pay off a new debt. Another debt he racked up in the 3 weeks you've been here. The world went very cold, very still. No, I whispered. He wouldn't. Marco's jaw tightened. Adriana's father has him now. And they're calling me. They said if I don't deliver you to them by midnight tomorrow, they will send him back to me in pieces, starting with his fingers. The phone in Marco's pocket began to ring. He pulled it out, looked at the screen, and put it on speaker. Set it on my dresser so we could both hear. Marco. The voice on the other end was older, rougher, filled with the kind of casual cruelty that came from years of getting away with it. Luca Lombardi. I have something of yours, or rather something that belongs to your little pet. A sound came through the phone, the unmistakable crack of flesh hitting flesh. A groan, then a voice I knew as well as my own heartbeat, distorted by pain and fear. Bella, baby, tell him I'm sorry. My father. They had my father. Midnight tomorrow, Marco, Luca Lombardi said. Red Hook Terminal, bring the girl, or I send Daddy back in pieces. And then I come for your mother and burn your pretty house to the ground. The line went dead. I stood there, frozen, as Marco picked up his phone and slid it back into his pocket. He looked at me with something that might have been pity, or might have been calculation, or might have been both. You see, Isabella, you can't leave, because now we are the only thing standing between your father and a shallow grave. The war has started, and you're right in the middle of it. He moved toward the door, then paused with his hand on the knob, turned back to look at me. You can stay a victim, Isabella, or you can become a survivor. The choice is yours. Aldrashin, but if you choose to survive, if you choose to fight, then be in the basement shooting range at 6 tomorrow morning. Because I'm going to teach you how to use a gun. And tomorrow night, we're going into hell. He left. The door closed. I sank down onto the bed and stared at nothing. My father had sold me. Not directly, not with words. But he'd tried to sell the ledger to the Lombardis. And in doing so, he'd painted a target on both our backs. He'd chosen gambling debts over my safety. Again, just like he'd chosen the cards over my college fund. Just like he'd chosen the next big score over staying sober for my high school graduation. And Marco. Marco had been honest in his way. He'd told me I was prey in the outside world. He'd never promised love, never promised anything except protection under his banner. And now he was offering me something else. A choice. Victim or survivor. I looked at the bag I'd packed, at the clothes I'd thrown in there, thinking I could just walk away from this life. How naive. How stupid. There was no walking away. There was only forward. Only through. At 5:45 the next morning, I was waiting in the basement when Marco arrived. He looked surprised to see me, though he hid it quickly behind that mask he wore so well. He was carrying 2 hard cases, which he set down on the metal table with careful precision. "You came," he said. "I'm choosing to survive." He nodded slowly, something like respect flickering in his dark eyes. "Then let's begin." The shooting range was soundproofed and climate-controlled, tucked away in the belly of the estate like a secret. Marco opened the cases and began pulling out weapons. A Glock 19, a smaller .38 special revolver, extra magazines, boxes of ammunition. He handled them with the easy familiarity of someone who'd been holding guns since childhood. "Have you ever fired a weapon?" he asked. "No." "Good, that means you have no bad habits to unlearn." He picked up the .38 special. "This one, smaller, easier to conceal. Only 6 rounds, but they'll put a man down if you hit center mass." He showed me how to hold it, how to stand, how to sight down the barrel. His hands covered mine, adjusting my grip, and I was acutely aware of his body behind me, the heat of him, the solid strength. Professional, clinical. But something else lurked beneath the surface, something neither of us wanted to name. "Breathe," he said quietly, his voice close to my ear. "Squeeze the trigger. Don't pull. Gentle pressure until it breaks." I fired. The recoil jarred my arms. The sound, even through the ear protection, was enormous. The target, 20 feet away, remained unmarked. "You're anticipating the recoil," Marco said. "You flinched before you fired." Again, again and again and again. For 3 hours, we repeated the same sequence. Load, sight, breathe, squeeze. The targets began to show holes, not center mass, not yet, but progress. Evidence that I was learning, that I could do this. We took a break around 9. Sat on a bench against the wall. Marco handed me a bottle of water. My hands were shaking from adrenaline and exertion. "Why are you really helping me?" I asked. "You said I was bait, so why teach me to fight? Why not just hand me over to the Lombardis and get what you want?" Marco was quiet for a long time, long enough that I thought he wouldn't answer. Then he reached up and pulled something from under his shirt, a gold locket on a chain. He opened it and showed me the picture inside, a woman, dark hair, kind eyes. Beautiful in the way that comes from inner gentleness rather than careful cosmetics. "Sophia," he said, "taken 3 days before she died. She was pregnant, 2 months. I was going to be a father." The grief in his voice was so raw it hurt to hear. "When I first saw you at the restaurant," he continued, "I thought you looked like her. Same eyes, same way of smiling when you talked to my mother. I thought it was Sophia's ghost mocking me, reminding me of what I'd lost." He closed the locket. "But you're not her. You're nothing like her. Sophia was gentle, afraid of this world. You?" He looked at me, really looked at me. "You face it head on. You don't break. You bend, and you survive, and you keep going. That's why I can't let you die, Isabella. Because you're the first real thing I've felt in 5 years." Something shifted in the air between us. Something dangerous and electric and inevitable. He leaned forward. I leaned forward. And then his phone rang, shattering the moment into 1,000 pieces. He answered it, listened. His face went hard. "When?" A pause. "How many?" Another pause. "Lock down the estate. Full security. No one in or out without my authorization." He hung up and looked at me. That was Enzo. Lombardi's people are moving. They know we're not going to bring you willingly. They're going to try to take you by force. When? Tonight, maybe sooner. He stood, held out his hand. Come on. We're not done training. By the time they come for you, you're going to be ready. We trained for another 6 hours. My arms ached, my back screamed, my hands developed blisters that burst and bled and formed new ones. But the targets started showing tight groupings around center mass, started looking like something a person could survive with. Or not survive, depending on which side of the gun they were standing. Around 3 in the afternoon, Carmela found us. She stood in the doorway of the range, looking small and frail and somehow more dangerous than any of the weapons on the table. Marco, Isabella, come with me. We followed her to her private sitting room, a space I'd only been in a handful of times. She gestured for us to sit, then reached into a drawer of her desk and pulled out something wrapped in oilcloth. She unwrapped it slowly, reverently, a small revolver, old but well-maintained. The grip showed wear from decades of use. 40 years ago, Carmela began, her voice steady, 2 men came to this house to kill me. I was 8 months pregnant with Marco. My husband was in prison, unable to protect us. The men thought I would be easy, thought a pregnant woman would be helpless. She picked up the gun, held it up to the light. I shot them both, one in the chest, one in the head, left their bodies in the garden for my husband's men to find. She looked at me. I tell you this because tomorrow you may have to do something terrible to Sicilian, and I want you to know that survival is not a sin, Bambina. Survival is sacred. She held out the gun. This is the weapon I used. I've kept it all these years. Now I'm giving it to you. My hands shook as I took it. It was heavier than I expected. Heavier with history and violence and the weight of choices that couldn't be unmade. There's something else. Carmela reached into her dress and pulled out a rosary, black beads worn smooth. My mother gave me these before I left Sicily. They kept me safe through things I cannot speak of. Now they're yours. She placed the rosary in my other hand, then covered both my hands with hers. Tomorrow, evil men will try to hurt you, to use you, to break you. But you are stronger than you know. You have the blood of women who survived wars and famines and men who thought we were weak. Show them what women like us can do when cornered. That night, I couldn't sleep again. The gun and rosary sat on my nightstand, strange talismans against the dark. Around midnight, I heard the piano music start. Without thinking, without planning, I got up and followed the sound. The music room door was open this time. Marco sat at the grand piano, his fingers moving across the keys with a grace that seemed at odds with the violence those same hands were capable of. The melody was heartbreaking, something old, something that spoke of loss and longing and wounds that wouldn't heal. I didn't know you played, I said softly. He didn't stop, didn't look up. Sophia taught me. She said music calms the beast. I moved closer, drawn by something I couldn't name. Tell me about her, the real her, not just the tragedy. His hands stilled on the keys. For a moment, I thought he would retreat behind his walls again. But he didn't. He turned on the bench to face me. She believed in redemption, thought anyone could change if they just wanted it badly enough. She thought she could save me, make me leave this life. His voice was rough. The car bomb that killed her was meant for me. Lombardi's doing. They wanted to send a message about the territory disputes. Sophia just happened to be driving my car that day. She was going to pick up baby clothes. We hadn't told anyone yet about the pregnancy. She wanted to surprise my mother. I'm sorry, I whispered. Don't be sorry. He stood, moved toward me. Just understand. That's why I became what I am. Why I stopped feeling. Because feeling gets people killed. But you feel now, I said. I can see it. Yes. He reached out, cupped my face in his hand. His palm was warm against my cheek. And it terrifies me. Because tomorrow we go to war, and I cannot guarantee I'll be able to protect you. And the thought of losing you the way I lost her makes me want to burn the whole world down. Then don't lose me, I said. Teach me to fight. Teach me to survive. And I'll stand with you. He kissed me, not gentle, not tentative, desperate and claiming and full of everything we'd been dancing around for weeks. I kissed him back, pouring 3 weeks of confusion and fear and something dangerously close to love into it. His hands tangled in my hair. My hands gripped his shoulders. We were drowning in each other, in the impossibility of this, in the knowledge that tomorrow might take everything away. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Marco rested his forehead against mine. Tomorrow night, he said, we go to Red Hook Terminal. Lombardi wants you delivered by midnight. We're going to give him exactly what he wants. And then we're going to end this war once and for all. And my father? His jaw tightened. I'll do what I can. But Isabella, you need to understand, your father made his choices. He put you in danger. Whatever happens to him is a consequence of his own actions. I nodded, even though it hurt. Even though part of me still wanted to believe my father was the man he'd been when I was 8, before the gambling took hold, before he started seeing me as an asset rather than a daughter. What do you need me to do? I asked. Stay alive. Stay behind me. And if I tell you to run, you run. You don't look back. You don't hesitate. You run and you don't stop running until you're safe. The next day passed in a blur of preparation. Enzo and his men loaded weapons into SU bombs. Carmela blessed everyone with holy water and quiet prayers. Marco moved through the house like a general preparing for battle, giving orders, checking weapons, making contingency plans for a dozen different scenarios. At 11:30 that night, I stood in the foyer wearing black clothes and a bulletproof vest that felt like wearing a corpse. The .38 special sat heavy in my coat pocket. Carmela's rosary wrapped around my wrist. I looked like someone preparing for war because that's exactly what I was. 3 black SUVs idled in the circular driveway. 12 armed men, not counting Marco, Enzo, and me. An army mobilizing to rescue a man who probably didn't deserve it. Marco came to stand beside me. He was dressed all in black, a tactical vest over his shirt, weapons I couldn't even name strapped to his body. He looked like what he was, a warrior, a prince of violence, a man who had been fighting his whole life and would keep fighting until either he won or the world ended. Rules, he said quietly. You stay behind me. Always. You don't fire unless I tell you to. You don't try to be a hero. If things go wrong, you run. Enzo will get you out. Understood? Understood. And Isabella? He turned to face me fully. In case I don't get a chance to say this later. What you've become in the last 3 weeks, the woman you're becoming, she's magnificent. Before I could respond, Carmela appeared. She hugged me fiercely, pressing something into my hand. Another rosary, this one with a small medal attached. Saint Michael, the warrior angel. For protection, she whispered. Come back to me, Bambina. Both of you. We loaded into the SUVs. I sat beside Marco in the middle vehicle. The convoy pulled away from the estate, 3 black ships sailing into a storm. Through the tinted windows, I watched Long Island give way to Queens, then Brooklyn, the landscape growing progressively more industrial and desolate. Red Hook Terminal, midnight, a trap within a trap. The Lombardis thought they were luring Marco. Marco thought he was rescuing my father and retrieving the ledger. But I knew the truth. Wars didn't have winners. They just had survivors. And the only question that mattered was which side we'd be on when the smoke cleared. Marco's hand found mine in the darkness. He didn't say anything. Didn't need to. The touch said everything. That we were in this together now. That whatever happened next, we would face it side by side. That somehow in the space of 3 weeks, I had stopped being a chess piece and become something else entirely. Something he was willing to go to war for. The convoy turned onto a long, dark road lined with abandoned warehouses. The rain had started again, heavy drops that drummed on the roof and turned the world into a watercolor painting of shadows and sodium light. Ahead, I could see the terminal, a massive hollow structure with corrugated metal walls and a door large enough to drive trucks through. A door currently standing wide open, waiting, inviting us in. Marco's phone buzzed. He looked at it, his face hardening. Lombardi just sent a message. He has 15 men inside. Says if we bring more than fate, he'll execute Vincent on the spot. Do you believe him? I asked. No, Marco holstered his phone. Enzo, plan B, take 8 men and circle around to the south entrance. When you hear shots, come in through the back. Element of surprise. Boss, that's still only 7 of us against 15 of them. Marco looked at me. 8 of us, Isabella counts. The SUV stopped 50 feet from the entrance. Marco checked his weapons one more time, looked at me. Last chance to stay in the car. I pulled the .38 special from my pocket, checked the cylinder like he'd taught me. 6 rounds, 6 chances to survive. I'm going with you. He nodded. Something like pride flickered across his face. Then let's go get your father back. We stepped out into the rain and the dark and the beginning of the end. The warehouse loomed ahead, its open door revealing nothing but shadows and the distant sound of dripping water. Somewhere in there, my father waited. Somewhere in there, Luca Lombardi and his daughter Adriana were preparing whatever trap they'd laid. And somewhere in there, the truth about who I really was, who I could become, was waiting to be born in blood and bullets and the kind of choices that define you forever. Marco took point. I fell in behind him just like he taught me. Three of his men flanked us. We advanced toward the warehouse, toward the trap, toward whatever waited in the dark. The rain fell harder. Thunder rumbled in the distance. And Isabella Romano, 24 years old, took her first steps into the war that would transform her into something new, something dangerous, something powerful, something that would eventually learn to wear a crown made of shadows and steel. The warehouse smelled like rust and seawater, and the particular kind of decay that comes from things left to rot in the dark. Our footsteps echoed against concrete as we moved deeper into the shadows. Marco leading with the fluid grace of someone who had done this 1,000 times before. The rain drummed on the metal roof overhead, creating a percussion that made it impossible to hear anything else. Perfect conditions for an ambush. Perfect conditions for dying. Floodlights snapped on without warning, blinding us. I threw up my hand instinctively, squinting against the sudden brightness. When my vision adjusted, I saw them. 15 men arranged in a semicircle around the center of the warehouse. Armed, professional, waiting. And in the middle of it all, on his knees with zip ties cutting into his wrists, was my father. Vincent Romano looked like a man who had aged a decade in 3 weeks. His face was swollen, one eye sealed shut by bruising that bloomed purple and black across his cheekbone. His shirt was torn and stained with blood that might have been his or might have been someone else's. When he saw me, something broke in his expression. Not relief, not love, just desperate, selfish terror. Standing behind him, one hand resting almost casually on his shoulder, was Luca Lombardi. 60 years old, built like a man who had spent his life breaking things with his bare hands. A scar ran from his left temple to his jaw, cutting through skin that had seen too much sun and too much violence. His smile was the smile of a shark that had just caught the scent of blood. And beside him, wearing a white trench coat that seemed to glow in the harsh light, was his daughter Adriana. Beautiful, cold, fury burning in her ice blue eyes as she looked at Marco, at me, at the future she'd been promised and was watching slip away. Marco Vittorio, Luca's voice echoed off the metal walls. You brought the girl. Good. I see you still have some honor left. Marco's gun never wavered. He held it in a two-handed grip, aimed directly at Luca's chest. I brought her. Where's the ledger? Adriana laughed. It was a sound like breaking glass. We don't have the ledger, Marco. Dear Vincent here says he hid it. Won't tell us where unless we let him go. But we figured if we start cutting pieces off his daughter, his memory might improve considerably. The words hit me like a physical blow. They weren't planning to trade. They were planning to torture me in front of my father until he gave up whatever secrets he'd been protecting for 26 years. I was never leaving this warehouse alive. Marco must have felt me tense because his voice dropped low, meant only for me. Easy, stay behind me. When I move, you move. Vincent's voice cracked through the warehouse, high and panicked. Bella, baby, just go to them. Tell them I'll give them the book. Don't let them hurt me anymore. Time seemed to slow down, to crystallize. My father, the man who was supposed to protect me, who was supposed to love me more than his own life, was begging me to walk into torture to save his own skin, was telling me to sacrifice myself for his mistakes, for his debts, for his endless, bottomless need to gamble and lose and destroy everything he touched. Something inside me died in that moment, some last fragile hope that he might still be the father I remembered from childhood, that he might choose me, just once, over whatever addiction drove him. Marco's voice cut through the air like a blade. No. Luca Lombardi's smile widened. What did you say? I said no. Marco's voice was steel wrapped in ice. The girl stays with me. The ledger stays lost. And if you touch a hair on her head, Luca, I will burn everything you own to the ground and salt the earth where it stood. Vincent was screaming now, thrashing against his restraints. She's my daughter. I own her. Give her to them, Marco. You owe me. I saved your uncle back in '98. Marco's laugh was ugly, bitter. You drove a getaway car, Vincent. You didn't save anyone. And you just proved you're not a father. You're a coward, a rat, and rats don't deserve mercy. Everything happened at once. Luca Lombardi raised his hand. Kill them all. Gunfire erupted. The sound was deafening, overwhelming. a wall of noise that seemed to compress the air itself. Muzzle flashes lit up the warehouse like lightning, strobing across faces twisted with rage and fear and the particular intensity that comes from men trying to kill other men. Marco moved. God, he moved like violence personified. He grabbed my shoulder and threw me toward a concrete pillar, his body shielding mine even as he spun and fired. Two shots. Two Lombardi soldiers dropped, crimson blooming across their chests. He was advancing, not retreating, drawing their fire away from me, buying me seconds that felt like hours. I hit the ground behind the pillar, concrete chips exploding around me as bullets chewed into the stone. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the gun. 3 weeks of training and I was paralyzed, frozen, completely useless. Then I heard Marco scream my name. "Isabella, move, now!" Training kicked in, muscle memory overriding terror. I rolled to my feet, staying low, running toward the SUV parked 50 feet away. Bullets whined past my head like angry hornets. Something hot grazed my arm, a line of fire that told me I'd just come within inches of dying. Enzo appeared beside me, materializing out of the smoke and chaos. "Go! Get to the car!" He was firing as he ran, providing cover, buying me seconds with bullets and blood. I risked a glance back. Marco was still advancing, still firing with mechanical precision. He'd dropped 4 men now. 5. Moving between cover with the confidence of someone who had done this so many times it had become instinct. He was magnificent, terrifying, a god of war painted in muzzle flash and shadow. But he was also 1 man against 15. And the math didn't care how skilled he was. I saw Vincent. In the case, nobody was watching him anymore. He'd gotten his bound hands in front of him, was struggling to his feet. I thought for one desperate second that he might run toward Marco, toward safety, toward the daughter who had spent 3 weeks learning to shoot a gun so she could try to save his worthless life. He ran toward Luca Lombardi instead. Ran toward the enemy with his hands up, his mouth moving, words I couldn't hear over the gunfire but could guess. "I can get it. I can get the book. Don't kill me. Please don't kill me." Adriana raised her pistol, didn't hesitate, didn't flinch, shot Vincent Romano in the back. He fell face first onto the concrete. Blood pooled around him, spreading in a dark circle that reflected the overhead lights. My father. Dead. Not because he was brave or noble or trying to protect anyone. Dead because he was a coward who bet on the wrong side one last time. I screamed. The sound tore out of my throat, raw and primal. Through the smoke, Adriana stood over Vincent's body, pistol still raised. She was laughing, actually laughing. "Finally," she said, her voice carrying across the warehouse. "Finally, that rat is dead." Marco's gun swung toward her. "What did you say?" "I paid him $500,000 to plant the bomb in Sophia's car." Adriana's smile was manic. 5 years ago, your precious wife, your perfect little saint, I killed her, Marco, because you were mine first." The words hit like bullets. Marco froze, his face went white. "You. I loved you since I was 16, but you chose her." Adriana raised her pistol toward me. "And now this nobody?" 2 shots cracked simultaneously. Carmela stepped from behind a pillar, her old revolver smoking. Marco's gun echoed a heartbeat later. Adriana jerked twice. The white trench coat bloomed crimson. She collapsed, dead before hitting concrete. Carmela walked to Marco, touched his face. "Now Sophia can rest. Now you can rest, my son." Marco stared at Adriana's body. 5 years of grief suddenly given a name. A face, justice. "Boss, we gotta move." Enzo grabbed my arm. "Cops are coming." This time I didn't look back. Didn't watch my father's body grow smaller through the rear window. The past was dead. All of it. Time to run toward whatever came next. I moved. But part of me stayed in that warehouse with Vincent Romano's body cooling on concrete, with the last piece of my old life bleeding out in a pool of his own bad choices. We reached the SUV. The driver had the engine running, door open. I dove into the back seat. Enzo climbed in after me. "Go, go, go." The driver slammed the accelerator. Tires screamed. The SUV fishtailed, then found traction and rocketed toward the exit. Through the rear window, I could see Marco still fighting, still standing, still buying us time with every bullet. Then he turned and ran, sprinted toward the second SUV, dove through the open door as it started moving. Both vehicles burst out of the warehouse into the rain and the night, bullets chasing us, sparking off metal, shattering the rear window into 1,000 glittering diamonds. I collapsed against the seat, shaking uncontrollably. My arm burned where the bullet had grazed me. My ears rang from the gunfire. My father was dead. Dead, dead, dead. The word repeated in my head like a mantra, like a prayer, like the end of something I couldn't even name. Enzo was on the radio barking orders. "Boss, you good?" Marco's voice came through, strained but steady. "I'm hit. Shoulder. Not bad. Keep moving. They'll be following." "Where to?" "The estate. Full lockdown. This isn't over." The drive back felt like it took hours, every second stretching into minutes, every minute into eternities. When we finally pulled through the gates of the Vittorio estate, dawn was starting to break over Long Island Sound. Pink and gold light painting the sky, beautiful and indifferent to the violence that had just unfolded. Marco's SUV pulled up beside ours. He climbed out slowly, favoring his left side. Blood soaked through his shirt, dark and spreading. But he was alive. Alive when my father was dead. Alive when 15 men had tried to kill him. Alive because he was Marco Vittorio, and death itself seemed afraid to take him. He came to my door, opened it, looked at me with those shattered obsidian eyes. "Come on," he said quietly. "Let's get inside." The house was in chaos, armed men patrolling the perimeter, Rosa crying in the kitchen, Carmela standing in the foyer like a general surveying her troops, wearing a silk robe and holding a pistol in her right hand as if it were the most natural thing in the world. She saw Marco's blood and her face went hard. "How bad?" "Grazed. I'll live." "And Vincent?" "Dead." Marco's voice was flat, empty. "Lombardi's men shot him when he tried to make a deal." Carmela looked at me, saw something in my face that made her set down the gun and open her arms. I went to her like a child, letting her hold me while something broke loose inside my chest. I wasn't crying, couldn't cry. The tears were trapped somewhere behind my ribs, turned to stone by shock and exhaustion, and the particular numbness that comes from watching your father die. "Bambina," Carmela whispered. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Marco's phone rang. He answered it, listened, and his face went from hard to granite. "When?" A pause. "How many?" He hung up and looked at us, at the men with their weapons, at the fortress we'd turned his home into. That was my contact at NYPD. "Lombardi's calling in every favor he has. We have maybe 2 hours before this place is surrounded by cops, feds, maybe even SWAT. And Lombardi's not done. His men are regrouping. They're coming here. For all of us." "Then we leave," Carmela said simply. "We have the tunnel, the old Prohibition tunnel to the boathouse. We go now." "The tunnel's been flooded for 20 years, Mama." "Then we get wet." She looked at me. "Isabella, go to your room. Pack only what you can carry. 5 minutes. No more." I moved like an automaton, up the stairs, into my suite, grabbing clothes, the gun Carmela had given me, the rosary. Marco appeared in my doorway, a first aid kit in his hand. "Let me see your arm," he said. I'd forgotten about it, the graze. It burned now that adrenaline was fading, a line of fire across my bicep. Marco cleaned it efficiently, his hands gentle despite their strength, bandaged it with practiced ease. "I'm sorry about your father," he said quietly. "Don't be." My voice sounded strange, distant. "He made his choices. You told me that. You were right. Isabella." He caught my chin, made me look at him. "You're in shock. When it wears off, it's going to hurt. And I need you to know that when it does, I'll be here, okay?" I nodded, couldn't speak. If I spoke, the stone in my chest might crack and everything I was holding back would come flooding out. We heard it then. Distant but unmistakable. Sirens. Many sirens. Growing closer. "They're here," Marco said. "Time to go." We descended into the basement, into tunnels that smelled like mold and seawater and history. The water was waist deep, freezing cold, black as ink. Carmela went first, holding a waterproof flashlight, moving through the dark with the confidence of someone who had walked this path before. Marco stayed close to me, one hand on my back, guiding me through the narrow passage. Behind us, we could hear the sound of doors being battered down. Shouting. The chaos of law enforcement raiding a suspected crime lord's mansion. The tunnel seemed to go on forever. Water soaked through my clothes, making them heavy, making each step harder than the last. My teeth chattered. My injured arm throbbed. But I kept moving because stopping meant dying, and I had already watched one person die tonight. That was enough. We emerged in the boathouse 20 minutes later, dripping and shaking. A speedboat waited, Enzo already in the driver's seat. We climbed in. The engine roared to life. We pulled away from the dock just as searchlights began sweeping the shoreline. Through the spray and the dark, I watched the Vittorio estate disappear behind us, watched police lights painting the sky blue and red, watched Marco's kingdom burn while he sat beside me, bleeding and silent, and somehow still unbroken. Carmela pressed close on my other side, her hand finding mine in the dark. The three of us. A queen, a warrior, and a girl who had just watched her old life die, sailing into an uncertain future on a boat too small for the weight of everything we carried. We spent the next 3 days in a safe house in Connecticut, a cabin in the woods, isolated and defensible. Marco's shoulder healed slowly. My arms scabbed over. The news played constantly on the television. Marco Vittorio, wanted for questioning. The Vittorio estate seized. Luca Lombardi arrested but released on bail within 24 hours. The whole city talking about the war that everyone had known was coming. On the fourth day, Marco sat us down at the kitchen table. "I know where the ledger is," he said. Carmela and I both looked at him. He pushed a piece of paper across the table. An address, Rosso Antico, the restaurant where I'd worked, where this had all started. Vincent Romano was on the construction crew that renovated the wine cellar in 1998, Marco explained. He didn't hide the ledger somewhere random. He hid it in plain sight, in a place my family owned but would never think to look, in the walls of our own restaurant. We broke in at 3 in the morning. Marco used bolt cutters on the back door. The restaurant was dark and empty, smelling like garlic and old wine. I led them to the wine cellar, remembering stories my father had told me once, before the gambling took him. Stories about mixing mortar and laying brick and feeling proud of his work. Marco took a sledgehammer to the wall he'd identified. Stone and mortar crumbled. Behind it, wrapped in oilcloth and plastic, was a leather-bound book. The ledger. He opened it. Page after page of names. Judges, senators, police commissioners, district attorneys. Every corrupt official who had taken money from organized crime over the past 3 decades. Dates, amounts, bank account numbers. Enough evidence to bring down half the political establishment in New York. And there, marked with a red tab, was a page that made Marco go pale. "Payment for Sofia Vittorio hit," he read aloud. $500,000 to V. Romano for placement of device. Vincent, my father. He hadn't just been a driver in some old heist. He'd planted the bomb that killed Marco's wife, killed Marco's unborn child. My father's hands had built a device that destroyed everything Marco loved. I felt the world tilt, felt my legs go weak. Marco caught me before I fell. "Did you know?" His voice was quiet, dangerous. "No." The word came out as a sob. "I swear, I didn't know, Marco, I didn't know." He looked at me for a long moment, then pulled me close, holding me while I finally started to cry. For my father, for Sofia, for the unborn child, for all of us caught in the machinery of violence and revenge and choices that echoed across years. "I know," he whispered into my hair. "I know you didn't know. His sins are not yours, Isabella. His sins are not yours." But they felt like mine, felt like weight I would carry forever. We were still in the wine cellar when the police arrived. Someone had seen us break in, called it in. Within minutes, the restaurant was surrounded. SWAT team, FBI. Every agency that had been looking for Marco Vittorio. They arrested us, cuffed us, read us our rights. But Marco held onto the ledger until Agent Sarah Chen of the FBI tried to take it from him. "This book has names," Marco said calmly. "Names of people you work with. Names of people who sign your paychecks. You really want to take it from me?" Chen hesitated. That hesitation told Marco everything he needed to know. Within an hour, we were in a different vehicle. Federal agents, but not FBI. Men who answered to people whose names were probably in that ledger. They drove us to an undisclosed location, sat us in a conference room, and Deputy Director Morrison himself came to negotiate. He was 50, silver-haired, with the kind of face that belonged in boardrooms and country clubs, the kind of face that hid monsters in expensive suits. "Mr. Vittorio," he began, "let's discuss how we can resolve this situation." Marco set the ledger on the table between them. Full immunity for me, my mother, and Isabella Romano. All charges dropped, all warrants voided. We walk away clean. "Impossible." Marco pulled out his phone, showed Morrison something on the screen. "That's a dead man switch. If I don't check in every 12 hours, digital copies of this ledger get sent to the New York Times, Washington Post, and every major news outlet in the country, along with authenticated documents proving its validity." Morrison's face went pale. "You're bluffing." Try me. They stared at each other. Two predators. Two men who understood that power wasn't about violence. It was about leverage. About knowing which cards to play and when to play them. Morrison blinked first. 24 hours, he said. You have 24 hours to leave New York. Permanently. And those copies better never surface. Where do we go? Somewhere we can monitor you. Miami, Vegas, New Orleans. Your choice. Marco looked at me. At Carmela. Miami. Done. They released us that night. Gave us new identification. Money. Instructions. We drove south with nothing but the clothes on our backs and the weight of everything that had happened. The estate was gone. The organization was scattered. Vincent was dead. Sophia's ghost had been laid to rest, or at least explained. We were free. Free and completely untethered from everything we'd known. 6 months later, I stood on Collins Avenue in Miami and looked up at the sign. Vittorio's, our restaurant. Not an empire built on violence and fear, just a restaurant. Legitimate, clean, serving the kind of food Carmela had taught me to make in that other life. The grand opening was tonight. Press, celebrities, local politicians who didn't know or didn't care about who we'd been in New York. Marco had invested everything we had left into this. A new start, a new life, a way to honor Sophia's memory without being consumed by the violence that had killed her. I wore an emerald dress that probably cost more than I used to make in 6 months. My hair was styled, my makeup professional. I looked like someone who belonged in this world of champagne and strategic smiles. But underneath, I was still Isabella Romano, still the girl who had learned to shoot a gun in a basement, still carrying Carmela's rosary in my purse alongside the point. 3/8 special I'd never stop carrying, because you could leave the war, but the war never really left you. Marco found me on the balcony overlooking the ocean. He looked good, healthy. The shadows under his eyes had faded. The constant tension in his shoulders had eased. He was wearing a white linen suit that made him look like he belonged in an old movie. Handsome, dangerous, mine. Nervous, he asked. Terrified, he laughed. Actual laughter. Something I'd rarely heard from him. Me too. We stood in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the Atlantic, pink and orange and gold painting the sky. Beautiful, peaceful, everything our old life hadn't been. I want to ask you something, Marco said quietly. He pulled a small box from his pocket, opened it. Inside was a ring. Vintage, diamonds surrounded by smaller stones. Simple. Perfect. Isabella Romano, he said, and his voice was steady, but his hands shook just slightly. You walked into my life as bait, as a tool, as something I was using, and you became my salvation. You became the reason I remember how to be human. Will you marry me? I looked at the ring, looked at him, looked at the future we were building from the ashes of everything we'd lost. Yes, I whispered. Yes. He slipped the ring on my finger, kissed me as the sun disappeared below the horizon. And for the first time in 6 months, I felt something that might have been hope, might have been happiness, might have been the beginning of healing. The restaurant opened that night. It was a success. Critics loved it. Customers lined up. We were building something good, something real, something that didn't require blood to maintain. 3 months later, we were married in a small ceremony at Vizcaya. Carmela officiated, having gotten ordained online specifically for this purpose. Rosa stood as my witness, Enzo as Marco's. We said our vows overlooking Biscayne Bay while pelicans dove for fish and the Miami sun beat down with benevolent intensity. I was dead before you, Marco said, his voice rough with emotion. You brought me back to life. I was prey before you, I said. You taught me to be a predator. We kissed, Carmela cried, and Isabella Romano became Isabella Vittorio. Not a servant, not a victim, not prey, a queen. We built our empire differently this time. Restaurants, real estate, import-export, all legal. We employed people who needed second chances, created a foundation in Sophia's name that helped families of crime victims, used our resources to actually help people instead of exploiting them. But we weren't naive. We kept the ledger copies, kept our weapons, kept our security. Because men like Luca Lombardi didn't forget, didn't forgive. And somewhere out there, his son Matteo was watching, waiting, planning his own revenge. 1 year after we'd arrived in Miami, Matteo Lombardi walked into our restaurant during a private dinner. He was 35, sharp-suited, with his father's cold eyes but more intelligence behind them. More calculation. Mr. Vittorio, Mrs. Vittorio, he said, his voice smooth, congratulations on your success. Marco's hand drifted toward his weapon. I touched his arm gently. Not yet. Not here. What do you want, Matteo? Marco asked. Peace. He sat down without being invited. My father died in prison last month, heart attack. His war with you destroyed our family. I don't want to continue it. I want to propose an alliance. Legitimate business. No blood. We're stronger together than apart. And I should trust you because I'm not my father. Because the old way of doing things is dead. And because if we don't work together, the other families will eat us both. He pulled out a business card. Think about it, but don't think too long. The world is changing. We adapt or we die. He left. Marco and I sat in silence for a long moment. Do you trust him? I asked. No, but he's not wrong about the world changing. Marco looked at me. What do you think? A year ago, he never would have asked my opinion, never would have treated me as an equal partner. But I wasn't the frightened girl in the cheap coat anymore. I was Isabella Vittorio, co-owner of a growing empire. The woman who had walked through fire and come out steel. I think we stay vigilant, I said. We keep our leverage. We prepare for betrayal. But we also acknowledge that the old way cost us everything. Maybe there's another path. That night, we stood on our penthouse balcony overlooking Miami. The city glittered below us like a sky full of fallen stars. Marco's arm was around my shoulders. My hand rested on my stomach where a secret was just beginning to take shape. A future, a legacy. Something to build for instead of just survive. Do you ever regret it? Marco asked quietly. Coming with me that night? Everything that happened after? I thought about Vincent, about Sophia, about the violence and the fear and the cost of everything we'd built. Thought about the girl I'd been, serving tables and drowning in debt and seeing no way out. No, I said honestly, I regret what we lost, who we lost, but I don't regret becoming who I am. You asked me once to choose, victim or survivor. I chose survivor, and I'd choose it again. He kissed the top of my head. I love you, Isabella Vittorio. I love you too. The city sparkled below us. Somewhere out there threats waited, Matteo Lombardi and his plans, federal agents watching for any sign we were returning to old ways. The past always ready to reach forward and drag us back. But for now, in this moment, we were safe. We were together. We were building something that might actually last. I had walked into Marco Vittorio's world as prey, as a frightened girl with no options and no future. I had been used, manipulated, caught in a war I didn't understand. But I had survived, had learned, had transformed. They say the most dangerous men whisper threats, but the most dangerous women? We don't threaten at all. We simply smile. We wait. We build our empires in plain sight. And when the moment comes, we strike with all the accumulated power of everything we've survived. I was Isabella Vittorio now, wife, partner, queen, and I was just getting started. The ledger remained hidden, the empire grew, and the girl who once served tables in Tribeca learned to rule an empire built not on violence, but on something more dangerous. Intelligence, strategy, the kind of power that comes from knowing everyone's secrets and choosing exactly when to reveal them. My father had been a coward. Sophia had been a saint. Carmela had been a warrior. And I was all of them and none of them. I was something new, something this world had never seen before. A woman who had walked through hell wearing cheap shoes and emerged wearing a crown made of starlight and steel. This was my story. This was my triumph. This was the beginning of a dynasty that would be remembered long after all of us were dust. The queen had risen, and she would never kneel again.